Hi, today I want to just briefly talk about how dichotomies can often limit our personal evolution. Now, I believe we're all evolving in a certain way, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and physically on some levels, and that's part of the process of life. However, mentally and emotionally, oftentimes we can become limited by the perceptions that we have about the world around us, and this is often caused by our um, being unaware of the presence of dichotomies in the way we perceive our world. So let me explain what a dichotomy is. A dichotomy is basically when we see any person or any situation as one-sided, meaning it's either this or that, this or not this. It's like there's something and you can only have two choices. Now, in nature, there are these aspects that there are only two choices. For example, um, you're not just a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. The leaves have fallen off the tree or they haven't. But when it comes to creating a broader context for our life, our thinking sometimes becomes a little too rigid. Now, Aristotle is to blame for some of this because he started all the idea of putting things into classifications, and it's in this class and not in that class. And when something is in the wrong class, we get very upset. We have to move it to a different class. For example, we do this in politics. We look at certain parties, and we put a person's views into a certain party, or they claim a certain party affiliation. Or you're either, like here in the United States, you're either a Democrat or a Republican, or in the UK you're Labor or Tory or whatever. But and if someone doesn't operate in those two parties, it causes a lot of problem in trying to classify where they are, where they're not a Republican or they're not a Democrat because of this. But in our broader context of our lives, we see ourselves as trying to improve, but we're trying to improve through the lens of a dichotomy. And what I mean is, it's either we're rich or we're poor. We're either happy or we're sad. We're either good or we're bad. So you have, good on one side, and then there's a slash, and then not good, which we label bad, on the other. But most of the time, we're the ones who are making the distinction about what's the difference between the two. And we don't recognize that there's a third option, or a fourth, fifth, sixth. So you can be good sometimes and not good other times. You can be rich and you can be poor. You can have it at both times. Now, that's a little difficult for us because we're so used to kind of these rigid ways of seeing the world, because it gives us this feeling of certainty, of control of the environment, because we're able to classify things into certain categories. Well, if we're evolving, a lot of times our personal, emotional, spiritual, whatever evolution can be limited by these rigid ways of seeing the world. So let's just look at rich and poor. So you're either rich or poor. Now, who gets to define what is what? So, for example, you say, well, somebody's making $30,000 a year compared to somebody making $300,000 a year, and we're talking about U.S. dollars. So you'd say, well, the person 30,000 barely, putting food on the table, they're poor, whereas the person who's making $300,000, they're rich, or $3 million, whatever it is. But then, who's making that distinction? Because we're putting rich and poor into categories assigned to a certain numeric figure. So if somebody's making $30,000 and they've been able to save money and they have $10,000 in cash in their savings account, but the other person who's made $300,000 has spent $310,000. So they're $10,000 in the hole. They may have a lot of things that they've blown their money on, but when it comes to actual wealth, the person who's been able to somehow save the 10,000, even though making a lower amount of money, then we'd have to say, well, is that rich? The house size. The house size, does that determine what's rich or poor? Uh, I used to frustrate my wife sometimes when we first started dating, and she'd say, "You're really great," and I would say, "Sometimes." And then sometimes she'd get upset with me and say, you're really annoying. And I'd say, sometimes. Because you can be great and you can be annoying. It's not that you're always great or always annoying. We notice that the world comes in multiple perspectives, but we somehow think that it should be one or two. So our partners should always be fun. And then when they're not fun, we think, well, they're coming over to this side. That's wrong. That's bad. As opposed to you can't have fun without not fun. I mean, it's the absence. You can't have a one-sided coin here. So being able to see that there's more than just these two limitations. The problem on a further level is that when we start believing that there are only two ways to see the world, to experience the world, we get locked into that. And then we start to overgeneralize everything to those two experiences. We start to lock in people and situations in certain categories. And sometimes they don't fit in those categories. But if those are the only two categories of um, identification that we have, we will kind of force them in. So then when you get into a situation where it doesn't go the way that it normally has in two categories, you'll either just refuse to kind of participate with it, or you'll just try to force something into that category. And a lot of times you just kind of are overwhelmed. Well, this makes no sense because you're either this or you're that. So being aware that we are the ones who are creating the categories is the first step to transcending that. To we evolve to a different level. So when we have somebody in our life that we don't like, we can say they're a horrible, terrible person, and they have probably done horrible, terrible things, but there have been times where they haven't as well. And it's hard to see that because we just want to see the person in the one side. So for me, evolving is acknowledging the horrible, terrible stuff, but also looking at when are they not horrible and terrible? When is life not horrible and terrible? And getting this kind of a more well-rounded perspective of things. That's when we start to, instead of terrible, wonderful, and there's this, we can kind of blur that distinction and kind of see life more as it really is, rather than our limited, one-sided way of experiencing it. So this could be in work, this could be in finances, this could be a personal relationship. Actually, relationship, the more you can accept that that person has all sides to them, and you'll see a little bit of all sides, and you can go with that kind of a balance of all sides. Your relationship's going to be much more productive and enjoyable. But if you're locked into a way of seeing them as only one way, and when they don't measure up to that way, you think something's wrong with them, and it may be something wrong with them, but also may be due to how we are locking them into a category. So when they do things that we think are outside their character, we have to remember that we're the ones who created that category of character, and we placed them into it. So as you go through your daily life, just maybe start to see, um, what kind of dichotomies, either or, this or not this, this or that kind of way do I see things. And in a lot of situations, you'll find that there's really more than two options. And the more you can see a third and a fourth option, and to accept that each side has the opposite side to create that wholeness, then you can take in the full experience of being alive, and it may actually be more empowering, more enjoyable, and help further the evolution that you're on now. Hope this helps. If you find value in these kind of things, please subscribe and keep up with my latest information and conversation. And I appreciate you being here today. Thanks.